The sky over Montana didn't just get dark. It was eaten alive. A wall of black rolled in from the north, swallowing the mountains, the plains, the last bit of daylight. Lightning tore open the belly of the storm, and in those violent, flickering bursts, you could see her. A woman on horseback, hunched low, her face buried in the animal's drenched mane. Her name was Jenny, and she was running for her life. Her knuckles were bone white, tangled in the horse's hair. Every breath she took was a ragged, desperate gasp, a perfect match for the labored breathing of the magnificent chestnut mare beneath her. Starlight. The horse was stumbling, her legendary endurance finally giving out. Behind them, headlights. 2, maybe 3 sets, bouncing and jerking over the open range. They weren't just following. They were hunting. Another flash of lightning. Jenny risked a glance down at her side. A dark stain was spreading across her shirt, a stain that wasn't just rainwater. The pain was a constant, searing reminder. Glass shattering, shouting, the cold, hard shock of metal against her skin. Then the bright, blinding pain, followed by the warm, wet feeling of her own blood. "Just a little further, girl," she whispered into Starlight's ear, feeling the horse's powerful muscles trembling with exhaustion. 30 miles. They'd covered 30 miles since sunset, but 30 miles with a hole in your side is an eternity. Then through the sheets of rain, she saw it. A cluster of lights, a pinprick of hope in an ocean of darkness. A ranch house, shelter. She steered Starlight toward it, a last desperate gamble. She ignored the engines roaring closer behind her, the beams of their headlights sweeping the plains like prison searchlights. But Starlight had given everything she had. Without warning, the mare's front legs buckled. Jenny was thrown forward, hitting the mud with a force that knocked the air from her lungs. The world exploded in a flash of white-hot pain from her side, and for a moment there was nothing. When her vision cleared, she was on her hands and knees in the muck. Starlight was on her side, her flanks heaving, her eyes rolling in terror. "I'm sorry, girl," Jenny choked out, forcing herself to her feet. "I'm so sorry." The lights of the ranch were closer now, maybe 500 yards. A big farmhouse and a barn. Behind her, the headlights of her pursuers had stopped. Their beams began to sweep the area where she'd fallen. They had her pinned. She didn't know how she found the strength. She just knew the alternative was unthinkable. If they found her, the memories were still broken. Edwin's face twisted with a rage she'd never seen before. The sickening thud of a body hitting the floor. Blood on the polished hardwood floors. Blood on her hands. Not her blood. Not all of it. She staggered toward the barn. Each step was an agony. Every breath was a war. Another lightning bolt lit up the sky, revealing the barn door, hanging partially open. A rectangle of perfect, inviting darkness. She slipped inside, the smell of hay and horses wrapping around her like a ghost of a safer time. Her legs finally gave out. She collapsed against a stack of hay bales, the edges of her vision going dark. The last thing she heard was the sound of engines growing louder, and then nothing. At 3:17 in the morning, Jackson Mallister's eyes snapped open. He wasn't dreaming. He was instantly awake, fully alert. 23 years in law enforcement drills that into you. Something had pulled him from a dead sleep, a sound that didn't belong. He lay still, listening past the familiar noises of his ranch, the wind howling, the rain hammering the roof, and underneath it all, an engine. No, multiple engines. On his access road, moving slow. No one had any business on his property at this hour. Not in this storm. Not ever. Jack slid out of bed without a sound. He moved to the gun cabinet in the corner, his movements economical and silent. He pulled out his Remington 870 shotgun, the cold steel a familiar weight in his hands. He checked the load, then moved to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw them. Headlights sweeping across his property line. They were searching, then another sound. Closer, from the barn. A soft thud, almost lost in the storm. Jack pulled on his boots and a rain slicker, the shotgun held at the ready. He slipped out the back door into the howling wind in horizontal rain. He moved through the shadows, his eyes on the vehicles. They had stopped near his eastern fence line, their beams cutting methodical patterns across the open range. They hadn't turned toward the house. Not yet. He reached the barn. The big door was ajar, swinging in the wind. Jack knew with absolute certainty that he had barred that door before turning in. He eased it open just enough to slip inside, then closed it silently behind him. The darkness was thick, filled with the familiar smells of hay and leather. A soft wicker came from one of the stalls. Diamond, his old mare, knew he was there. Then he heard it again, a ragged, shallow breath that didn't belong to any of his animals. He moved down the center aisle, silent as a ghost. A flash of lightning illuminated the cavernous space through the high windows. And that's when he saw her. A woman collapsed against the hay bales in the far corner, soaking wet, covered in mud, and a dark, unmistakable stain of blood on her side. He saw something else, too. Just inside the main door, a chestnut Arabian mare lay on its side, flanks heaving, exhausted but alive. Outside, the headlights began to move again. This time, they were coming straight for the house. Jack didn't hesitate. He made his decision in a fraction of a second. He moved to the main barn door and threw the heavy wooden bar across it, sealing them inside. Then he crossed the barn to the woman's side. Up close, she looked even worse. Pale as death, dark hair plastered to her face. Mid-30s, maybe. The wound in her side looked like a knife slash. Deep. Through the wooden walls of the barn, he could hear the vehicles pulling up to his house. 3 of them. Whoever they were, they had him outnumbered. Jack Mallister had left law enforcement 5 years ago. He'd walked away, bitter and disillusioned after a case went so wrong it shattered his faith in the system. He'd sent an innocent man to prison, and the guilt had eaten him alive. He came back to his family's ranch to find peace, to live a quiet life, to never get involved in other people's problems again. But some promises are impossible to keep. He lifted the unconscious woman. She was lighter than he expected. He carried her to the tack room at the back of the barn, a small, windowless, secure space. He laid her gently on the cot he kept there for nights spent watching over a mare about to foal. "Stay put," he murmured, knowing she couldn't hear him. The Arabian mare was a bigger problem. She was too exhausted to move, but her presence was a dead giveaway. He grabbed a heavy horse blanket and threw it over her, hiding her distinctive markings. It wasn't much, but it might buy them a few precious seconds. He extinguished the single lantern, plunging the barn into near-total darkness. Then he found a crack in the siding that gave him a view of the yard. The 2 SUVs and a pickup truck had parked in front of his house. 4 men were getting out, flashlights cutting through the rain. They fanned out, moving with the kind of tactical precision he recognized instantly. These weren't amateurs. They were trained, and they were armed. One of them pounded on his front door, the sound loud enough to be heard even over the storm. No answer. The man tried the handle, found it locked, then stepped back to confer with another man who seemed to be the leader. The leader pointed, straight at the barn. Jack tightened his grip on the shotgun. The old Jack would have walked out there, badge or no badge, and demanded answers. But he wasn't that man anymore, and these men didn't look like they were interested in answering questions. He heard them approaching, their boots crunching on the wet gravel. He retreated to the tack room, closing the door quietly. The woman hadn't moved. In the dim light filtering through the cracks, he could see her face more clearly now. There was a strength there, even unconscious. And something else. Something hauntingly familiar. The barn door rattled. Someone was trying to force it open. "Hello? Anyone in there?" A voice called out, dripping with false friendliness. Jack's voice was low and steady, a gravelly rumble that carried through the thick wood. "This is private property. State your business." There was a pause. The men outside were conferring. "Sorry to disturb you, sir," the voice came again. "We're looking for a woman. She might have passed this way. She's wanted for questioning." The man paused for effect. "In connection with a homicide." Jack's eyes flicked to the unconscious woman on the cot. Homicide. It was possible, but something was wrong. The way they moved, their late-night arrival in a storm, the tactical search pattern. This didn't feel like a police investigation. It felt like something else entirely. Something much, much darker. "Haven't seen anyone," Jack called back, his voice a hard, flat line. And I don't open my door to strangers at 3 in the morning. Come back with the daylight if you need to talk. Another, longer pause. He could picture them outside weighing their options. Their leader was probably deciding just how much trouble an old rancher could possibly be. We have reason to believe she's armed and dangerous, the voice replied, a new edge of menace creeping in. For your own safety, sir, we'd like to check your property. The words hung in the air, a thinly veiled threat. They weren't asking anymore. Jack fell back on old habits, his voice ringing with an authority he hadn't used in 5 years. You got a warrant? Sir, this is an emergency situation. No warrant, no entry. Jack cut him off. That's the law. Now get off my property before I call the sheriff. He heard them muttering to each other outside the door. They hadn't expected this. They had expected a sleepy, scared old man, not someone who knew the law better than they did. We'll be back, sir, the leader's voice finally called out, laced with frustration and a promise of violence. With the proper documentation. Jack didn't move. He stood by the crack in the siding, watching as the men retreated. He watched their vehicles turn around and head back down his access road, their red taillights disappearing into the storm like the angry eyes of a retreating beast. Only when he was absolutely certain they were gone did he turn and go back to the tack room. She was awake. Her eyes were wide with a primal fear, pressing herself back against the wall like a cornered animal. Easy, Jack said, setting his shotgun aside. He raised his hands, palms open, a universal sign of peace. You're safe here. For now. Her eyes darted from his face to the shotgun, then to the door. She was calculating her chances. Even weak and injured, there was a fierce, wild intelligence in her gaze. Who are you? She asked, her voice a raw whisper. Jack Mallister. This is my ranch. He kept his voice low and calm. You want to tell me why 4 armed men are hunting you in the middle of the night? She swallowed hard, one hand pressed protectively against her wounded side. My horse. Starlight. She's alive, Jack said. Exhausted but alive. I covered her up before they got here. A wave of relief washed over her face, so powerful it almost made her collapse. But it was quickly replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Did they see her? No. They're gone for now, but they said they'd be back. He let that sink in, then he looked her straight in the eye. They also said you're wanted for homicide. If it was possible, her face went even paler. She closed her eyes and a spasm of pain crossed her features that had nothing to do with her physical wound. I didn't kill anyone, she whispered. Then so quietly he almost didn't hear it, she added. At least, I don't think I did. The uncertainty in her voice was the most genuine thing Jack had heard in years. She was either the best liar he had ever met, or she was telling the absolute terrifying truth. She really didn't know. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated, a war playing out behind her eyes. Then she seemed to make a decision. Virginia Blackwood, but most people call me Jenny. Well, Jenny, Jack said, moving to get the first aid kit he kept in the tack room. You've got a nasty cut that needs cleaning and a story that needs telling. He looked at her, the woman who had brought a storm of violence to his doorstep. Which one do we take care of first? A ghost of a smile touched her lips, there and gone in an instant. The cut, please, she said. The story is complicated. As Jack cleaned and dressed the deep gash in her side, he watched her. She didn't flinch, didn't cry out. She just watched him work, her eyes sharp and assessing. Her hands, he noticed, were calloused but elegant. She had a pale band on her left ring finger where a wedding ring used to be. You a doctor? She asked, her voice a little stronger now. Former sheriff, he replied, not looking up. Picked up a few things. He felt her tense at the word sheriff. Fear, maybe, or just caution, but she didn't pull away. Why former? She asked. Jack's hands paused for a fraction of a second. That's a complicated story, too. She nodded, accepting the deflection. He finished the bandage, then helped her sit up, propping her against the wall. Water would be good, she said when he offered. She drank carefully, each sip measured and controlled. Even on the run, bleeding and terrified, there was a discipline about her. When she finished, she handed the canteen back, her eyes meeting his. I don't remember everything, she said, her voice low and urgent. There are gaps, but I know I'm in danger. And now I've put you in danger too. I should go. As soon as Starlight's rested. That horse won't be ready to travel for at least a day, Jack said, his tone leaving no room for argument. And you're in no condition to go anywhere. He sat back on his heels, studying her. So why don't you start with what you do remember? Those men will be back. And I'd like to know what I'm dealing with. Jenny took a deep, shaky breath, wincing as it pulled at her stitches. I was married to Edwin Blackwood. She watched his face for a reaction. Do you know the name? Jack frowned. Vaguely. A big-shot businessman from Helena. Real estate, politics, that sort of thing. Among other things, she said, a bitter edge to her voice. He's very powerful, very well connected. 3 years ago, I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. Edwin was charming, successful, a pillar of the community. Her voice became distant, like she was describing someone else's life. The changes were so slow I almost didn't notice. Little comments about my friends, my clothes, suggestions that became orders. Checking my phone, my schedule. By the time I realized I was in a cage, the door was already locked. He hit you, Jack said. It wasn't a question. Her eyes met his, surprised by his directness. Yes, but that wasn't the worst part. It was the games. The psychological warfare. He'd move things in the house, deny saying things we'd discussed, just to make me think I was losing my mind. She rubbed the pale mark on her finger. Gaslighting, they call it. She took another breath, steeling herself. 2 weeks ago, I found documents in his office. Plans for a huge project involving water rights and mineral extraction, right here in this part of the state. There were lists of chemicals, things that would poison the groundwater for generations. Jack's interest sharpened. This was hitting closer to home. I confronted him, Jenny continued. It was stupid. I should have just taken the documents and run. But I was so angry. People's lives, their ranches. He just changed. The mask slipped. He admitted everything. Said the ranchers were standing on valuable land, and that once their water was gone, and their operations failed, the land could be bought for a fraction of its value. Her hands began to tremble. His assistant, David, he overheard us. He came to me later, said he had more. Proof of other things Edwin was involved in. Bribes, blackmail. He had it all on a flash drive. We planned to meet the next night after Edwin left for a business dinner. Her face clouded over, her brow furrowed as she struggled to piece it together. I remember David arriving. He looked so nervous. He handed me the flash drive, and then nothing. It's just fragments, shouting, the sound of glass breaking, blood. She touched her side. I woke up on the floor of the study. He was on the floor, not moving. There was so much blood. She swallowed hard. And a knife. I checked for a pulse. He was dead. Her eyes were haunted. Then I heard Edwin's car in the driveway. I just panicked. I grabbed the flash drive, ran to the stables, and took Starlight. I've been running ever since. You don't remember who stabbed David? Jack asked, his voice carefully neutral. Or how you got that wound? Jenny shook her head, her face a mask of frustration and despair. It's a total blank. I get flashes, the knife in my hand, Edwin shouting my name, but I can't tell what's real and what's just my mind trying to fill the void. Jack considered her story. Traumatic amnesia. It was real, but it was also a convenient excuse for a murderer. These men, he said, they work for your husband? I think so. He has a private security firm on retainer. Ex-military. Paid very well for their loyalty and discretion. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. Mr. Mallister. Jack, he corrected automatically. Jack, I know this sounds crazy. I barely believe it myself. But I know I didn't kill David. I couldn't have. And that flash drive, it's proof of something so much bigger than just me. People need to know. Outside, the storm was finally starting to break. Dawn wasn't far off. Jack stood up, his knees cracking in protest. 5 years. For 5 years he had sworn he would never get involved again. He'd seen what happened when he trusted his gut over the facts. An innocent man rotted in a cell because of him. But looking at Jenny Blackwood, at the terror and determination warring in her eyes, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. The stirrings of a purpose, the instinct to protect, the gut feeling that this, right here, mattered. "Where's the flash drive?" he asked. Relief flooded her face. It was so potent, it was like watching a light turn on. He was considering it. He was giving her a chance. "In Starlight's saddlebag," she said, "hidden in a tear in the lining." Jack nodded. "Get some rest. We'll figure out our next move when you've had some sleep." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth," he said, not looking at her, "I don't think you killed him." "Why?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine surprise. He finally turned to look at her, his gaze steady. "Because guilty people have their stories all worked out. They remember too much, not too little." He let that hang in the air for a second. "You're still trying to find yours." He closed the door, leaving her in the quiet dark of the tack room. And he knew with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him that his quiet life was officially over. Martha Simmons arrived at exactly 6:30 a.m., just like she had every morning for the past 12 years. She parked her ancient pickup, gathered the basket of fresh eggs, the mail, and a foil-wrapped plate of her famous cinnamon rolls. At 70, Martha didn't miss much. She saw the unfamiliar Arabian mare in the paddock immediately. She saw the fresh, deep tire tracks in the mud, tracks made by heavy vehicles in the dead of night. Her lips pursed. Jack had company, and it looked like trouble. Martha had been the housekeeper, cook, and general conscience of the Mallister Ranch since Jack's father was alive. She'd watched Jack grow up. She'd been there when he'd left for a career in law enforcement, and she'd been there to help pick up the pieces when he came back 5 years ago, broken in ways you couldn't see. She let herself in with her key. The house was quiet. Jack wasn't at the kitchen table with his coffee. That was unusual. She set about her routine, putting the cinnamon rolls in the oven to warm, starting the coffee. As the rich aroma filled the room, the back door opened. Jack came in. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. There was mud on his boots and he was carrying the shotgun. "Morning, Martha," he said, setting the gun by the door. "Humph," she replied, giving him a look that could strip paint. "You look like you've been up all night chasing ghosts, and there's a horse in your barn that isn't yours." A small quirk of a smile touched Jack's lips. "Nothing gets past you, does it?" "Not likely to start now," she said, pouring him a coffee. "You want to tell me what's going on?" Jack sank into a chair, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "We have a guest. She's in the tack room, injured." Martha's eyebrows shot up. "A she?" "It's complicated, Martha. She's in trouble. Some men came looking for her last night." "What kind of trouble?" Martha asked, her voice sharp. She was fiercely protective of Jack and the quiet life he'd tried to build. "The kind that involves knives, gunshot wounds, and men with military training," Jack said. He gave her the short version of the night's events, of Jenny's story, her husband, the documents, the murder accusation. Martha listened without a word, her expression growing more and more grim. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. "And you believe her? This woman you just met?" Jack stared into his coffee cup. "I don't know. Her fear is real. The wound is real. And those men, they weren't cops. But you're right. She could be a murderer. She could be lying about all of it." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "But my gut says she's not." Martha's expression softened. Jack's gut. It had once been his most reliable tool until the Wilson case had shattered his faith in his own judgment. It was a good sign that he was starting to trust it again. "Well," she said, turning to get the warm cinnamon rolls from the oven, "we better get some food into her. Injured fugitives need to keep their strength up." Jack looked up, surprised and touched by her immediate acceptance. "You're not going to lecture me about this?" Martha set the rolls down and turned to face him, her eyes fierce. "Jack Mallister, I have known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. You spent 23 years putting yourself between good people and bad things. It's who you are. For 5 years I've watched you try to be someone else, and it has made you miserable." She waved a hand toward the barn. "I don't know this woman or her story, but I know you. If you think she needs help, Then that's good enough for me. Something tight in Jack's chest seemed to loosen. Thank you, Martha. Don't thank me yet, she said briskly. You bring her into the house. The blue guest room is ready. I'll get some of your mother's old clothes from the attic. And be careful what you say in town. If this husband of hers is as powerful as she says, he'll have eyes and ears everywhere. Martha's smile was grim. But so do I. After she left for the barn with a tray of food, Jack looked at the mail she'd brought in. Among the bills was an official-looking envelope from the county water board, a notice of a public hearing about a proposed water management project, one that would affect several properties upstream, including a corner of his own ranch. Jack's blood went cold. Jenny had mentioned water rights, a project. Could this be it? He pulled out his laptop. A quick search for Edwin Blackwood, Montana, brought up dozens of articles, society pages, business deals, a photo of him smiling next to the governor. The man's smile never quite reached his eyes. Jack dug deeper. Nothing about a murder, nothing about a missing wife, but a local Helena blog mentioned police activity at the Blackwood residence 3 days ago. No details, just speculation. He was about to close the laptop when an older article caught his eye, a photo from a charity event a year ago. Edwin Blackwood standing shoulder to shoulder with another man, a man Jack recognized instantly, Judge William Donovan, the judge who had presided over the Wilson case, the judge who had systematically blocked every piece of evidence that would have proven Mark Wilson's innocence, the judge who had personally sent an innocent man to prison and destroyed Jack's career in the process. It could be a coincidence, but Jack had stopped believing in coincidences 5 years ago. Martha came back into the kitchen carrying the empty tray. She ate every last crumb, she reported. Poor thing looks half-starved, but there's a fire in her, worried more about that horse of hers than herself. She saw the look on Jack's face. What is it? He turned the laptop so she could see. The man on the left is Edwin Blackwood. The one on the right is Judge Donovan. Martha squinted at the screen. Understanding dawned in her eyes. The judge, from the Wilson case. The one, Jack finished for her, his voice hard as iron. They sat in silence for a moment, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. The Donovan Ranch borders Tom Harmon's old place, doesn't it? Martha said suddenly, where he lost all those cattle last year from the contaminated water. And the Wilson property was just downstream from there, Jack added, a cold dread spreading through him. And after Mark Wilson went to prison, Martha continued, her voice barely a whisper, his property was sold to a development company. Jack was already typing, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He pulled up the records for the sale of the Wilson Ranch. The buyer was a shell corporation called Horizon Enterprises. He clicked on the corporate filings for Horizon Enterprises. The majority shareholder was listed right there in black and white, Edwin Blackwood. Jack leaned back in his chair, the whole ugly picture snapping into focus. They hadn't just framed an innocent man, they had orchestrated the entire thing from the beginning. The contamination, the investigation, the trial, the conviction. It was all part of a plan to steal a man's land, his life, his freedom. Martha, Jack said, his voice dangerously quiet. I think we just stumbled into the middle of a war. Martha's face was set in hard, determined lines. Well then, she said, pouring them both another cup of coffee. We'd better arm ourselves for battle. The bath was the first moment of peace Jenny had known in days. The hot water soothed her aching muscles, and the simple act of washing away the dirt and grime of her escape felt like shedding a layer of fear. As she soaked, fragments of memory returned. Edwin's face, a mask of cold fury. You stupid bitch! You have no idea what you're dealing with. And David, his hands trembling as he gave her the flash drive. This goes all the way to the top, Jenny. State officials, judges. It's bigger than just a few ranches. But after that, still nothing. Just the black, terrifying void. She dressed in the clothes Martha had left for her, a simple cotton dress that had belonged to Jack's mother. They were a little loose, but clean and comforting. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, pale, haunted, but with a flicker of defiance in her eyes that Edwin had never managed to extinguish. She found Jack in his office, his laptop open, a thunderous expression on his face. "Have you looked at the drive?" she asked. He nodded, turning the screen toward her. It was encrypted. Password protected. Any ideas? Jenny stared at the prompt. David was clever. He wouldn't have used something obvious. She thought about their conversations, their shared secrets. "Try Cassandra," she said. Jack typed it in. Access denied. "Who's Cassandra?" he asked. "In Greek mythology, she was a prophetess cursed to know the truth but never be believed," Jenny explained. "It was a dark joke between us. He called me his Cassandra because he kept bringing me warnings about Edwin, and I was too afraid to believe him." Her voice caught. "Try it again, but add a number." His lucky number was 21. Blackjack. Jack typed Cassandra 21. Access denied. Jenny racked her brain. What else? What was their connection? The myths, the stories. Who cursed Cassandra? "Apollo," she whispered. "Try Apollo 21. Jack typed it in. The screen flickered, and then folders appeared, organized by date and project. They were in. For the next hour, they fell down a rabbit hole of pure, calculated evil. David had been meticulous. There were spreadsheets detailing chemical levels in groundwater, with one column showing the real results from an independent lab, and another showing the falsified results submitted to the state. There were scanned emails, back and forth conversations between Edwin and state officials, discussing how to handle uncooperative landowners. And then they found the folder labeled Project Headwater. It was a map of their county and the surrounding counties. Dozens of properties were highlighted in red. "These are all working ranches," Jack said, his voice grim. "I know half these families. The Mercers, the Harmons." He pointed to a small highlighted section in the corner. "Even a piece of my own property. And they all have water rights connected to streams that start in the northern mountains," Jenny added, the full scope of the plan becoming terrifyingly clear. "Contaminate the water at the source," Jack pieced it together. "The ranches downstream become worthless. Livestock gets sick, crops fail, land values plummet. And then a company called Horizon Enterprises swoops in and buys up the land for pennies on the dollar." Jenny finished, her voice shaking with rage. It wasn't just a land grab. It was a scorched earth campaign. Then Jack pulled up another file. It was a list of corporate officers for Horizon Enterprises. And under legal counsel, there was a familiar name. Judge William Donovan. "My God," Jenny whispered. "He wasn't just helping Edwin. He was a partner." "He framed Mark Wilson to get his land," Jack said, his voice flat and dead. "And I helped him do it. I put the cuffs on him. I testified at the trial. I stood there and watched as Donovan sent an innocent man to prison, all while knowing he was part of the conspiracy that put him there." The guilt and anger in his voice was a raw, open wound. The kitchen was silent, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. Martha, who had come in to check on them, was the first to speak. Her voice was like flint. "Well, now we know, and knowing means we do something about it." "Do something?" Jack gave a harsh laugh. "Martha, we're talking about a conspiracy that involves a federal judge, one of the most powerful businessmen in the state, and God knows how many corrupt officials. We can't fight that." "You got a better idea?" she challenged, her hands on her hips. "Because as I see it, we have two choices. We can send this young woman on her way and pretend we never saw her, letting them destroy this entire valley. Or we can stand up and fight." "Fighting could get us all killed," Jack said, his voice low. "There are worse things than dying," Martha shot back. "And letting men like that win is one of them. That's not the Jack Mallister I raised." Jenny had been listening, her heart pounding. "I won't ask you to risk yourselves for me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "As soon as Starlight can travel, I'll take this drive to the FBI." "And what happens then?" Jack countered. "You walk into a federal building, a wanted fugitive with a hole in your side and a gap in your memory. Best case, they lock you up while they investigate, which gives Edwin and Donovan plenty of time to bury the evidence, and you with it. Worst case, you go to prison for a murder you didn't commit." The brutal logic of his words hit her like a physical blow. She was trapped. Jack was silent for a long moment, the gears turning behind his eyes. The old lawman, the investigator he thought he had buried, was coming back to life. "We need more," he said finally. "More information, more allies, and we need to get your memory back. The key to all of this is what happened in that study. That's our weak point, and it's their biggest liability." He turned to Martha. "I need you to be our eyes and ears in town. Bridge Club, the hair salon, the grocery store. Find out what people are saying about this water project, about Judge Donovan, about Edwin Blackwood." Martha nodded, a glint in her eye. "Consider it done. I'll know more by noon than the local paper does all week." Jack turned back to Jenny. "You need to rest, heal. The stronger you are physically, the better the chance your mind has of healing too." "What about the men from last night?" Jenny asked. "And they'll be back." "Yes, they will," Jack agreed. And for the first time, Jenny saw a dangerous light in his eyes, a flicker of the man he used to be. "But this ranch has been in my family for 100 years. I know every rock, every tree, every hiding place." He walked over to the gun cabinet and unlocked it. "And they're about to find out that a quiet old rancher can have some very noisy surprises waiting for them." He looked at Jenny, his expression serious. "We're in this now. All of us. We fight, or we lose everything." Jenny looked from Jack's determined face to Martha's fierce expression. For the first time since she'd fled Helena, she wasn't just running. She was part of a resistance. And as the Montana sun rose higher in the sky, a quiet war began on the Mallister Ranch. A war for the truth, for the land, and for their very lives. Martha Simmons went to town and activated a spy network that would have made the CIA jealous. At the Copper Canyon Cafe, she learned from Darlene, the owner, that Judge Donovan wasn't just coming to town. He was holding a private, invitation-only meeting at the Elks Lodge to address landowner concerns about the water project. "Very hush-hush," Darlene had said, pouring Martha another coffee. "Frank Mercer over on the East Fork got an invite. He's worried sick." Just then the bell over the door jingled, and in walked Sheriff Tom Landry. Landry had been Jack's deputy. When Jack resigned in disgrace after the Wilson case, Landry had stepped into his shoes. Their relationship was complicated. He saw Martha, hesitated, then walked over to her table. "Morning, Martha," he said, his tone polite but cautious. "Mind if I join you?" "Pull up a chair, Sheriff," she said. He got right to it. "Saw some unusual tire tracks out your way this morning. Heavy vehicles, private security types." He watched her face carefully. "Also got a call from the state police, looking for a woman, Virginia Blackwood, wife of Edwin Blackwood, wanted for homicide up in Helena." Martha's face was a perfect mask of grandmotherly concern. "Good heavens, a murderer here in Summit Valley." "That's the official story," Landry said, lowering his voice. "Thing is, I've been a cop for a long time, and when a woman runs from a powerful husband, there's usually another story, a story the husband doesn't want told." Martha just sipped her coffee. "So," Landry continued, "I figured I'd ask around, see if anyone matching her description had turned up. Someone who might need help, but be afraid to ask for it." He looked her straight in the eye. "If such a person had turned up and someone I trusted told me she was in real danger, well, officially I'd have to report it. But unofficially," he let the sentence hang in the air, "a man can get delayed. Paperwork can get lost." He leaned in closer. "Judge Donovan himself called me this morning, very interested in finding Mrs. Blackwood, very insistent that this be handled quickly and quietly." He stood up to leave. "You tell Jack. You tell him if he needs anything. Anything at all. He knows where to find me." Martha watched him go. The sheriff wasn't just offering help. He was choosing a side. Meanwhile, Jack had called the only other person in the valley he trusted implicitly, Dr. Thomas Morrison, the local vet. "Doc, I need you to make a house call," Jack had said, "for a horse, an Arabian mare, suffering from exhaustion." When Dr. Morrison arrived, he took one look at Starlight, then at the pale, haunted woman standing in the barn doorway, wearing Catherine Mallister's old clothes, and he understood immediately. "You've got a fine animal here, ma'am," he said to Jenny, his voice kind. "She's pushed herself to the very edge for you." "She saved my life," Jenny said simply. As he treated the horse, the vet kept up a stream of casual chatter. Heard Judge Donovan is holding a big meeting about that new water project, he mentioned offhandedly. He saw the flicker of alarm that passed between Jack and Jenny. Shame about what happened to Mark Wilson, he continued as if thinking aloud. Always struck me as convenient. Wilson starts asking questions about his water quality, and the next thing you know, he's in prison for contamination, and his land gets sold to that Horizon Enterprises company. He looked directly at Jenny. I was called out to the Blackwood estate once, about 3 years ago. I remember a woman who loved her horses, but had a shadow in her eyes. His voice grew solemn. I also remember thinking that if one of my animal patients showed the signs of fear and control that I saw in that house, I would have reported it as a case of abuse. Jenny's eyes filled with tears. Did you ever treat the horses for a woman named Sarah Lefton? The old vet's face hardened. I did, a little over a year ago. Beautiful Morgan Gelding. Died of a sudden, violent colic. 2 weeks later, Sarah was found dead. They called it a suicide. He paused. I never believed it. And a month after that, her farm was sold. To Horizon Enterprises. He packed up his bag. I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, miss, and I'm not asking. But it seems to me a lot of coincidences in this valley all lead back to the same people. He handed Jack a bottle of supplements for the horse. I'll go through my records. I've treated a lot of sick animals on a lot of ranches that have since been sold to Horizon. Maybe we can find a pattern. He looked from Jack to Jenny. You two are poking a bear. Make sure you're ready for the fight. After the vet left, Jack knew they were running out of time. Edwin Blackwood didn't leave loose ends like sick cattle and suspicious vets. He cleaned up his messes. Sarah Lefton was proof of that. That evening, as they sat down to a dinner of pot roast Martha had prepared, Jack looked at Jenny. We need to try and get your memory back. Robert, my brother, he used to work with trauma victims. He knows techniques. The atmosphere in the room instantly chilled. Your brother, Jenny asked, the one you haven't spoken to in 5 years? He's an assistant U.S. attorney, Martha explained quietly. Environmental Crimes Division. He sounds perfect, Jenny said, confused. Why won't you call him? Jack's jaw tightened. Because the last time we spoke, he told me I was a paranoid disgrace who was throwing his career away over the Wilson case. He told me I was seeing conspiracies that weren't there. Jack stood up abruptly from the table. He made his choice. He chose the system over the truth. I won't ask him for anything. He walked out, the back door slamming behind him. Martha sighed. Stubborn fools, the both of them. She looked at Jenny. Robert believed in the system. Jack believed in his gut. The Wilson case forced them to choose. Robert accused Jack of being obsessed, and Jack accused Robert of being willfully blind. They haven't spoken a word since. But Jack was right, Jenny said. This flash drive proves it. Yes, Martha agreed, but pride is a powerful poison. Robert would have to admit he was wrong, and Jack would have to ask for help. She shook her head. I'm not sure which is less likely. Later that night, Jenny found Jack on the back porch, staring out at the mountains. Martha told me about your brother, she said softly. Jack didn't turn. Then you know why I can't call him. I know why you think you can't, she corrected gently. I used to believe things about my husband, too. I ignored red flags, made excuses, because admitting the truth meant my whole life was a lie. It was easier to believe the lie. She looked at him. Maybe your brother wasn't choosing the system over you. Maybe he was just trying to protect the only world he understood. The truth on this flash drive, it's world-shattering. Maybe now he's ready to see it. Jack was silent for a long time, the cool night air swirling around them. I'll think about it, he said finally, but they both knew they didn't have much time for thinking. Edwin Blackwood was out there. He was hunting, and his hunt was getting closer. The next morning, the war escalated. Martha burst into the kitchen, her face pale. It's Darlene from the cafe. Judge Donovan's meeting at the Elks Lodge. It's been moved up. It's not next week. It's tomorrow night. Why the rushing, Jack asked. They're saying they're worried about activist protests, Martha said, her tone dripping with disbelief. More likely they're worried about what Jenny took with her. The timeline was accelerating. They were being forced to act. Jack went into his office. He called Frank Mercer, who confirmed he'd be at the meeting and agreed to be their eyes and ears. He called Dr. Morrison, who had already found a disturbing pattern of animal illnesses on ranches later sold to Horizon. Then he sat there, staring at the phone, at the contact he hadn't touched in 5 years, Robert Mallister. He took a deep breath, Jenny's words from the night before echoing in his head. Maybe now he's ready to see it. He pressed the call button. It rang 3 times. Jack was about to hang up when a voice answered, clipped and professional. Robert Mallister. Jack's throat was dry. Robert, it's Jack. A stunned silence, then, Jack, is everything okay? The immediate, unguarded concern in his brother's voice hit Jack like a punch. I'm fine, Jack said, but I need your help, professionally. Jack laid it all out. The woman, the flash drive, the water contamination, the land grab, and then, the hardest part. And Judge William Donovan is at the center of it all. It's all connected to the Wilson case, Robert. I have proof. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Jack could picture his brother, pinching the bridge of his nose, wrestling with the implications. Edwin Blackwood's wife is missing, Robert said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Virginia Blackwood, wanted for murder. She's here, Robert, at the ranch, Jack said. She didn't kill anyone. Edwin did. He framed her. And you believe her? I do, Jack said simply. But more importantly, I believe the evidence she brought with her. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to come here, to look at it yourself. Another long, heavy pause. Jack held his breath. When do you need me there? Robert asked. The relief that flooded through Jack was so intense, it made him dizzy. As soon as you can get here. Donovan's in town. The meeting is tomorrow night, and the men looking for Jenny could be back at any moment. I'll be there this afternoon, Robert said. Then after a slight hesitation, he added, It's good to hear your voice, Jack. Before Jack could respond, the line went dead. When Robert Mallister arrived, the tension between the two brothers was thick enough to cut with a knife. They shook hands stiffly on the porch, 2 strangers who shared a lifetime of history. But when Jack led him into the office and opened the files on the laptop, the tension changed. It was no longer personal, it was professional. Robert read through the documents, his face growing more grim with every click of the mouse. The falsified reports, the emails between Edwin and Donovan, the cold-blooded planning. He finally leaned back, his face ashen. My God, Jack, you were right. He looked at his brother, 5 years of anger and misunderstanding dissolving in an instant. You were right about all of it. The Wilson case. I was so blind. He shook his head. I was wrong, and an innocent man paid the price. We can't change the past, Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. But we can damn well fix the future. The Mallister brothers were a team again. Robert, the legal mind, began mapping out a federal case. RICO charges, conspiracy, fraud, murder. Jack, the investigator, began planning their tactical moves. They brought Jenny in. Robert questioned her gently, professionally. She told him her story, including the frustrating gaps in her memory. We need to get that memory back, Robert said. Your eyewitness testimony is the final nail in the coffin. We can try a technique called context-dependent recall. We recreate the sensory environment of that night. The sights, the sounds, the smells. Sometimes it can unlock the doors trauma has slammed shut. The plan was set. The next morning they would attempt the memory recovery. That night, Frank Mercer would go into the Elks Lodge meeting wired for sound. But their planning was interrupted by Martha, who burst in with news that changed everything. Edwin Blackwood is in town, she announced, her voice grim. My sources at the pharmacy just saw him. He came in for painkillers. He's using an alias, Edward Blake, and he has a nasty bruise on the side of his head. Jenny's hand flew to her mouth, the fireplace poker. He was asking questions, Martha continued, about a woman with dark hair, traveling alone, possibly injured. He told the pharmacist it was his troubled sister. He wasn't just directing his men anymore. He was here, in Summit Valley. He was hunting Jenny himself. The timeline had just moved up again. The war wasn't coming tomorrow night. It was starting now. The next morning, Jack's library was transformed. Heavy curtains were drawn. A fire crackled in the hearth. A recording of gentle rain played from a small speaker. Martha had even procured a vial of the expensive cologne Edwin wore. The air was thick with the scent, a ghost of Jenny's past. Jenny sat in a leather armchair, her eyes closed, her heart pounding. Jack and Robert sat nearby, watching, waiting. "Tell us what you remember, Jenny." Robert's voice was calm, almost hypnotic. "You're in the study. David has just given you the flash drive." Jenny talked, her voice a whisper, describing the room, the tea, David's nervousness. The memories were clear, up to a point. "He's telling me about the other ranches, about Sarah Lefton." Her voice faltered. "And then, it's gone. The wall comes down." "Stay there," Robert said gently. "Just before the wall. What do you hear?" Jenny concentrated. The rain, the fire, David's voice, and something else. Her eyes squeezed shut. Footsteps, in the hall, soft, coming closer. "Who is it?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But David hears it too. He stops talking. He looks terrified." "What happens when the door opens, Jenny?" A sharp gasp escaped her lips. "Edwin." The name was a curse. "He's supposed to be at dinner, but he's standing there. His face, it's a mask. Pure, cold rage." The memories came back in a flood, a torrent of terror she couldn't stop. "He locks the door," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "He pulls a knife, one of his hunting knives, pearl handle." She was reliving it, every horrific second. He grabs David, demands to know who he's told. David is begging. I try to stop him. He shoves me. I fall. He turns on David. Her body trembled violently. He stabs him. Once, twice, 3 times. So fast. David just crumples. There's so much blood. Jack was on his feet, moving toward her, but Robert held up a hand, stopping him. They had to let it play out. "Edwin comes for me," she sobbed. "The knife is dripping. He says, 'Where is the flash drive?' We struggle. The knife. It cuts my side." Her hand flew to the wound. "I fall back. I grab the fireplace poker. I swing it. I hit him. He goes down." Her eyes flew open, wide with the shock of the full, unvarnished truth. "I didn't kill David," she gasped, looking from Jack to Robert. "Edwin did. I saw him. And I hit him. I fought back." Jack was at her side in an instant, his hand on her shoulder. "We believe you, Jenny. We always did." Robert switched off the recorder, his face grim. "That's it. Eyewitness testimony. We've got him." But their victory was short-lived. The plan was for Frank Mercer to wear a wire into the meeting that night. Robert and Jack would monitor from the truck. As darkness fell, they watched Mercer walk into the Elks Lodge. The audio feed crackled to life. They heard Judge Donovan's smooth practice speech. They heard Edwin, using his alias, talking about fair market value and community partnerships. Then they heard Frank Mercer, his voice like gravel, start asking questions. "Funny how all these properties with environmental problems end up being owned by your company, Mr. Blake," Mercer said, his voice dripping with suspicion. "Like the Wilson place and the Lefton farm." There was a sudden tense silence on the audio feed. "I believe this conversation is over." Edwin's voice came back, cold as ice. Then Martha's panicked whisper through a second, hidden communicator. "They've made him. Edwin is talking to his security. He's pointing at Frank." Robert was out of the truck in a flash. "I'm going in. Get ready to move." Jack watched his brother stride into the lodge, using his federal credentials to get past the goons at the door. Through the wire, Jack heard Robert intercept Mercer in the hallway. But they weren't alone. Well, an assistant U.S. attorney?" Edwin Blackwood's voice purred with menace. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" Robert didn't back down. "We have the flash drive, Blackwood. The one David gave Jenny. We have her full statement. She remembers everything, including the fireplace poker." A harsh, ugly laugh. "You have nothing, and you're too late." Edwin's voice dropped to a venomous whisper, a final triumphant taunt. Virginia won't live to testify. In fact, my men are probably finishing the job right now. Jack's world tilted. The meeting, the wire, it was all a diversion, a trap. He ripped the earpiece out, his blood roaring in his ears. Jenny, alone at the ranch. He slammed the truck into gear, tires screaming as he peeled out, leaving Robert to deal with the chaos at the lodge. He floored it, the engine roaring in protest as he raced through the night, a single desperate prayer echoing in his mind. Be alive. Just be alive. The crunch of tires on gravel was the only warning Jenny got. She saw the black SUV pull up, headlights off. Two men moving like predators. Edwin's men. Her first instinct was to run, to grab Starlight and disappear into the night again. But she wasn't that person anymore. This was her fight now. This was her stand. She grabbed the shotgun Jack had left her. She turned off the lights, locked the doors, and waited in the darkness of the dining room. She heard glass break at the back of the house. They were inside. A figure appeared in the kitchen doorway, a silhouette with a handgun. Drop it! Jenny's voice was surprisingly steady. The man turned, a smirk on his face. You won't shoot me, Mrs. Blackwood. You're not a killer. You're right, she said, her finger tightening on the trigger. I'm a survivor. The shotgun roared, the blast deafening in the enclosed space. The man screamed, clutching a shattered shoulder as he went down. But the second man was already moving, crashing through the front door. He tackled her, sending the shotgun skittering across the floor. She fought back with everything she had, a wildcat fury born of desperation. She kicked, she clawed, she landed a knee to his gut that made him grunt in pain. But he was too strong. He pinned her to the floor, his fist raised. You're coming with us, he snarled. Conscious or unconscious. Your choice. The blow came, a glancing shot to her cheek that made her head explode with stars. But as he raised his fist for the final, knockout punch, a new voice cut through the chaos. Get off her! Jack stood in the shattered doorway, his own shotgun leveled, his face a mask of cold, absolute fury. He was a terrifying sight, the quiet rancher transformed into an avenging angel. The man on top of Jenny froze. Sheriff's on the way, Jack said, his voice dangerously calm. So are the feds. Your boss made a mistake. He threatened Jenny in front of my brother, an assistant U.S. attorney. The man's bravado evaporated, replaced by the dawning horror of a professional who has just realized how badly a job has gone wrong. Headlights flooded the yard. The sounds of sirens ripped through the night. Sheriff Landry's deputies stormed the house, followed moments later by Robert and two FBI agents. It was over. As the two intruders were cuffed and led away, Jack went to Jenny, his eyes filled with a concern so raw, so deep, it made her breath catch in her throat. Are you okay? He asked, his hand gently touching the bruise on her cheek. I am now, she whispered. Robert approached them, his face grim but triumphant. Blackwood and Donovan are in federal custody, he announced. When Blackwood made that threat against you, he sealed his own fate. He essentially confessed in front of a federal officer. It's over, Jenny. We got them. The words washed over her, a wave of relief so powerful her knees buckled. Jack caught her, his arms wrapping around her, holding her steady. You're safe, he murmured into her hair. It's all over. And in the circle of his arms, surrounded by the wreckage of her old life and the brave, good people who had become her new one, Jenny finally, truly believed it. The storm had passed. The legal battle that followed was long and messy, but the outcome was never in doubt. With the evidence from the flash drive, Jenny's unshakable testimony, and the corroborating stories from other ranchers, the conspiracy crumbled. Edwin Blackwood was convicted of murder, racketeering, and a dozen other charges. Judge Donovan was impeached and sentenced to life in prison for his role in the conspiracy and for framing Mark Wilson. Mark Wilson was exonerated and released, and with a settlement from the government, he was able to buy back his family's ranch. And Jenny? She didn't run. She stayed. She enrolled in refresher courses to renew her veterinary license. She started working with Dr. Morrison, who was all too happy to have the help. The people of Summit Valley, who had heard the rumors and whispers, saw something else. They saw a woman who had faced down monsters and won. They saw her skill with their animals, her quiet kindness, her unbreakable spirit. They judged her by her actions, just as Martha had said they would. One cool autumn evening, a year after the storm had first brought her to his door, she and Jack stood on the porch of the Mallister Ranch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Starlight, fully recovered and magnificent, grazed peacefully in the paddock. "It's funny," Jenny said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I was running for my life, and I ended up running right home." Jack wrapped his arm around her, the quiet rancher who had found his purpose again, the former sheriff who had finally found a justice he could believe in. They had faced the darkness together and come out the other side, not just as survivors, but as something more. They had found in each other a peace as quiet and as vast as the Montana sky itself. If you enjoyed the story of justice and redemption, and you want to hear more tales where the good guys fight back and win, then do me a favor. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single story. Thanks for watching.